Hi everyone, welcome to this week's Did You Know? Today I want to cover a topic that comes up frequently in Bible studies, not really in large groups, but when there are a lot less people, because I think some people wonder if they've missed something or that it's a silly question. However, I think it's something that a lot of people would like to know, and it doesn't get covered that frequently. And that question is, why did God choose the Israelites to be his chosen people? Why were the Hebrews the ones that he chose? Did he love them more than the rest of the world? And if so, why was that? Because the world was populated at the time. And so why would God do this? Why would God choose one group of people over the rest of the world? And it is an important thing to know because you have to understand the Old Testament is the history of the Israelites. It is the history from the beginning until the end of the prophets of the Hebrew people. And the New Testament is the fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecies, which brings us Jesus. And if we didn't have those Old Testament prophecies, we wouldn't even know that Jesus was the Savior of the world. And so both the Old Testament and the New Testament hinge on the fact that the Israelites are God's chosen people. But why is that? It all starts back way at the beginning of the Bible in Genesis chapter 12. And it is when God calls Abraham and gives him this promise that he will be the father of many nations. And it actually starts even before his name is Abraham. It's when he is still referred to as Abram before God changes his name. And God gives him this promise that indicates that he will become a great nation, which will be Israel. So Abraham is the forefather of the Israelite people. What it says in chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, it reads, "The Lord had said to Abram, 'Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the peoples on earth will be a blessing through you, will be blessed through you.'" This is important. He tells Abram to go to a different country. He's going to take him to this land, show him this land, because that is where this nation that is going to come from him will live. And he promises him this in Genesis chapter 12 at the beginning of the Bible. But he doesn't say that he will make him a great nation because he loves who will be his ancestors more than the rest of the world. No, he gives a specific directive at the end of verse 3. He says, "And all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you." Meaning that the nation that will come from Abraham will be a blessing to the rest of the world. The rest of the world needs to know who God is. They need to know the one true God. Right now, the rest of the world are following their own set of religious beliefs. They have their own ideas, their own ideologies, their own gods that they're all following. They need a group to really tell them who the one true God is. And they're going to need proof that he is the one true God. And we'll get to that at the end of this, what he does to show proof that he is the one true God. But he needs a group, a nation, to be a blessing to the rest of the world, to show the rest of the world what the truth is. And so he chooses them. Now, why he chose Abraham, it doesn't say. It just says that God chose Abraham. He called Abraham, and Abraham obeyed. He specifically says here, in Genesis chapter 22, verse 18, this is later, "Through your offsprings, all nations on earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed me." Because Abraham stayed true to God, listened to what he said, and followed him. God said he would make him a great nation. They would live in this beautiful land, and that they would be a blessing to other people. So the Israelites were his chosen people, not because he loved them and didn't love the rest of the world, but just the opposite. He did love the rest of the world, and he wanted to save the rest of the world, and he was going to use the Israelites as this beacon of hope, as this light in the darkness, to be able to tell the world the truth. Now, I'm telling you that he loved the rest of the world. So the next question that I often get is, if he loved the rest of the world at this time, why did he not only allow but command that they go and kill the nations that are living in the land of Canaan once they come out of Egypt. So if you don't know the history of the Israelites, what ended up happening is Abraham had Isaac, Isaac had Jacob, Jacob had Abraham had Isaac, Isaac had Jacob and Esau, and then Jacob, his one son, would be the father of Israel. His sons and grandsons would become the heads of the tribes of Israel. They actually lived in Egypt in slavery for 400 years. And after those 400 years, they left Egypt. Now, I told you that God would need a way to show the world that he was the one true God, and he used this exit from Egypt as this show to the rest of the world to prove to everyone that he was the one true God, and that the exit from Egypt was the way to show them. But when they came out, there are commands in the Bible for them to kill the nations that are in the land of Canaan. Now, I want to be clear. God did not tell them to just go murder anybody who they crossed paths with. He did not tell them to go and just kill anybody whose land they entered or walked through or traveled by. In fact, God calls for protection of all of the other people outside of the land of Canaan. In Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 10, I'm going to read 10 through 15. God tells the Israelites, when you march up to attack a city, and this is while they're traveling on their way to Canaan, make its people an offer for peace. So their first directive, when they go up to a city, they have to offer the city peace. If they accept it and open their gates, all the people in it shall be subject to forced labor and shall work for you. They can live. If they refuse to make peace and they engage you in battle, then lay siege to the city. This is how you are to treat all of the cities that are at a distance from you and do not belong to the nations nearby. So if they do not belong to the nations of Canaan, if they are outside, even if they're unbelievers, you can offer them peace. And you should offer them peace first and foremost, because God does love the rest of the world. But what does he say about those 7 nations that are living in the land of Canaan, that land that God had promised the Israelites? Not only did he promise the Israelites, but he promised Abraham back when he made him leave his home country and took him to show him this land. It tells us in verse 16 of Deuteronomy 20, however, the cities of the nations the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, do not leave anything alive that breathes. So anything that is in the cities of the land that you're going into, do not let anything that breathes live. Completely destroy them. The Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded you. Otherwise, they will teach you to follow all of the detestable things they do in worshiping their gods, and you will sin against the Lord your God. These are the people in the land of Canaan. God tells them completely destroy them. They're supposed to completely destroy them. A, because they're living in this land that the Israelites are supposed to live in and flourish in. And if those people are still living there, they're always going to be a thorn in Israel's side. And God actually warns them of that specifically. They will always wage wars with them. They will never be at peace. They will never have all of the blessings or the inheritance that God had promised to them as long as these people were living. But more importantly, they would pollute the Israelite nation. That the Israelites were supposed to follow God and his commands and his decrees and his laws. And they would live this good, healthy, blessed life. They would have a relationship with God, and their sins would be forgiven as long as they followed the sacrificial laws and they kept from sin. But if they were in the land of Canaan and the Canaanites were allowed to remain there, those 7 nations, they would pollute them. They would bring in their religious practices, all of the evil things that they had done. These were nations that sacrificed their children, their very own children, on a regular, very regular basis. They did terrible, horrible things. They lived so sinfully that it was almost that they boasted of their sin, and that they would pollute the Israelites. And we do see that happen because the Israelites do not follow God's command. They do let them live, and the Canaanites have that negative effect that God warned them about. But you see, God did not allow the Israelites, did not command them to get rid of all of the Canaanites just because they were residing in that territory. I think there is a misconception that God just said, okay, it's totally okay if you annihilate them because they're living where I want you to live. That's not it at all. In fact, the Canaanites and all of those 7 nations that are in that land had been cursed even before Abraham. Before Abraham, in Genesis chapter 9, if you know the story of the flood and Noah, you know that the world was flooded. Noah and his children were on a boat, and they survived the flood. And they landed, and they proceeded to live life. But it tells us in Genesis 9, chapter 20 through 27, what happened to his children. Noah had 3 children, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And this is what happened with the 3 of them. It says in Genesis 9:20, Noah, a man of the soil, proceeded to plant a vineyard. And when he drank some of its wine, he became drunk and lay uncovered inside his tent. During this quarantine, do not be like Noah. In verse 22, it says, Ham, the father of Canaan. So Ham would be the ancestor of all the Canaanites, those 7 nations. Their forefather is Ham. Ham saw his father naked, and he told his 2 brothers outside. He was mocking his father. But when Shem and Japheth took a garment, and they laid it across their shoulders, they walked in backwards, and they covered their father's naked body. They were respectful of their father. Their faces were turned the other way so that they would not see their father naked. When Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done to him, he said, Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves will he be to his brothers. He also said, Praise be to the Lord, the God of Shem. May Canaan be the slave of Shem. Shem would actually be the forefather of Israel. And so Noah cursed Ham, the father of the Canaanites, and they were this cursed nation. All of the groups that would come from Ham, they were cursed. And they fell into lives of sin and idolatry. But what we find is that that was not enough to make God want to get rid of Canaan or hand the Canaanites' land over to the Israelites. In fact, God tried to give the Canaanites ample time to turn from their ways. He tried to give them all opportunity in the world to change what they were doing and follow him. In fact, he gave them 400 years to do that. In Genesis 15, God is talking to Abraham again. We're going to go back to Abraham now, the forefather of Israel. The Lord said to him, Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated there. He tells Abraham, your descendants, this great nation that I'm going to make out of your people, they're going to be enslaved in a land for 400 years. Now, I told you one of the reasons that they had to be enslaved for 400 years, because I've heard people say, why would God let them be slaves in Egypt? One of the reasons was so that God could show who he truly was, that he was the one true God through their exit and through all of the events that led up to the exodus of Egypt and also all the things that came after the exodus. But also because of this, and I want you to listen closely. Verse 14, it says, But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterwards they will come out with great possessions, which he did. He allowed them to come out with the possessions of the Egyptians. You, however, will go to your ancestors in peace and be buried at a good old age. In the 4th generation, 400 years later, your descendants will come back here to this land that I am promising you, to this land of Canaan. For the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. They have to wait 400 years before they can come back here. Because the sin of the Canaanites is not bad enough for me to annihilate them right now. For me to take them out, to allow them to be wiped out, their sin is not great enough. They are sinful people, but their sin has not reached its full measure. I cannot allow them to be wiped out. He gives them 400 years to change their ways. He allows the Canaanites every opportunity to change what they did. And the Israelites were enslaved during that time. It wasn't that they were just somewhere else living the good life. They were enslaved for that 400 years. After the 400 years, their sin had just multiplied and multiplied and multiplied and become so great that they had no hope of getting anywhere close to God, that they had no hope as a nation to turn back to God and to be a good people. And so if you take away anything from what I talked about today, I hope you understand, A, that the Israelites, they are God's chosen people, but they are chosen to bless the rest of the world because God did love the rest of the world, and he still does. B, that God was not okay with the Israelites just taking anybody out. That was not the case at all, and that they had very specific instructions. And C, the people that God had allowed to be destroyed because the Israelites were coming into the land that he promised them, it was because they were so sinful, they were not innocent, and they were not without blame, and they didn't have hope. And that if they had remained there and had polluted the Israelites enough, the Savior of the world could not have come through a completely polluted bloodline. That there had to be pure worship to God and a relationship with God for Jesus Christ to be able to come through, for those prophecies to be fulfilled, for those prophecies to even have been written down. There had to be this belief and following of the one true God. And so without the land of Canaan being taken over by the Israelites, and without the Israelites being able to hold on to their beliefs, it would have been a detriment to the rest of the world for the rest of all time. God does love the world. He did love the world back then. He loves them now. And if we can learn anything from this entire Did You Know episode, it's that God just wants us to turn back from the things that we do wrong and just turn our faces back to him. That he loves us no matter what, and he's going to give us every chance that he can for us to turn back to him and love him right back. Thanks, guys. I hope you have a good week, and I will see you all on Sunday morning. Bye-bye.